This is the last module for Chapter 2 on psychological research. And in this module, we're going to talk about critical research issues. And the main question we're going to answer is, what major issues confront psychologists conducting research? And what we're really going to get into in this module is the ethical concerns that you as a researcher in psychology need to keep in mind when you're going to conduct research. And we're going to talk about the ethical research concerns with conducting research involving humans. And then we're going to end up with this module talking about the ethical concerns that you need to keep in mind if you're using animal models in your research. So the first part is the ethics of conducting research. And there are guidelines that you need to follow with this. So the first thing is informed consent. Informed consent is a document that you would give your participants that are volunteering to take part in your experiment, and it is the form you give them is the very first thing when they come in to take part in your experiment. So the informed consent may have information on it like telling you what the experiment, so to speak, is about, because there could be some deception if you don't want them to know exactly what it's about. It may say that they are voluntarily taking part in this experiment. They were not forced to do so, that they have the right to leave the experiment at any point in time if they would like to, so on and so forth. And then the last thing of that informed consent is their signature and the date. Now, that is the only part of the experiment that has their name associated with it, is that informed consent. And usually what occurs is, as a researcher, you then collect the signed or the consent forms, usually put them in a box, put them in a file in a closet somewhere, and you never think of them again. You have them in case anyone questions it, but you really do not associate that consent form with any part of the experiment, because all experiments should be done anonymously with no names involved whatsoever. So it's a document signed by participants affirming that they have been told about the basic outlines of the study and are aware of what the participation will involve. Now, after the experiment is finished, you have to debrief the experiment. You have to debrief your participants. And this is, again, you tell them what the experiment was about. You inform them if there was any deception involved. And with the deception, you can't deceive them so much to the point that if they really knew what the study was about, there's no way that they would take part in it. So there can't be that much deception. But again, debriefing is after participation in the study, the participants receive an explanation of the study and the procedures that were involved. Debriefing may occur verbally. It may occur with a piece of paper that is handed to them, so on and so forth. Now, the only time that informed consent and debriefing can be eliminated is when risks are minimal, is in a purely observational study in a public place. So if you're going to observe eating behavior at the food court at your local mall, you would not need informed consent, nor would you need debriefing from those participants. You're not asking them anything specifically, and this is the same way that naturalistic observation would be involved. You don't want participants to know that you're observing them, therefore you would not have an informed consent. But again, the debriefing, the risks would have to be very minimal if you are not getting consent or you are not doing any sort of debriefing. All right, let's continue on with the ethics of research. And there are guidelines set in place by the APA, the American Psychological Association. There are guidelines set in place for researchers to keep in mind before they conduct any sort of experiment on human participants. So one is that the protection of the participants from physical and mental harm. You cannot use any sort of part in a study that would give them physical or mental harm. You have to protect your participants against that. Participants have the right to privacy regarding their behavior. So this is again where no names whatsoever are involved with any part of the experiment, even if you do like a pre-post type of experiment where they come in, they take part in the experiment, and then they come back a week or so later to do a second part of the experiment. And you want to look at their behavior from one point in time to the next point in time. You would not have any names involved. You would give them a participant number. So participant number 15 did the first part of the experiment. They came back 2 weeks later and did the second part of the experiment. So that participant is number 15. There is no name involved in the experiment. You also have to assure the participants that their participation in the research is completely voluntary. They are not being forced to take part in this experiment whatsoever. There has to be a necessity of informing the participants about the nature of the procedures before the participant takes part in the experiment. So again, you can use some deception, but it can't be to the point where if they really knew what it was about, there's no way they would participate in the study. You're not going to tell them one thing and then do something completely separate as part of that experiment. So you have to inform the participants about the nature of the procedure. You know, whenever it comes to being a participant, let's say in a drug study, right? So you are taking part in that drug study. You have to be let known about any side effects that occur, what's going to occur during that procedure, so they know upfront what's going to happen. And then all experiments must be reviewed by an independent panel before being conducted. So when we conduct research in psychology, like in an academic setting at a university, every college and university has what is called an IRB. That IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. That board is made up of faculty and staff from across various disciplines on campus. Before you conduct your experiment or before you conduct your research, you need to fill out an IRB proposal. That IRB proposal is asking you a plethora of questions about your experiment. You submit your proposal to the IRB reads over your proposal, and they will either accept it, they may accept it with revisions, or they may deny it. But you have got to have acceptance of your study before you can actually conduct your study. So that's what we mean by all experiments must be reviewed by an independent panel before being conducted. So that is research on humans. The next thing is research using animals. So should animals be used in research? This is a very controversial topic, and one of the main concerns that individuals have who are against using research with animals is that the animals do not give their consent, right? When we conduct research with humans, we have them fill out a consent form. There is no consent form for animals, and that's one of the concerns that individuals against animals in research have in place. But again, the APA, the American Psychological Association, has guidelines in place for conducting research using animals. So animal research allows for these following things. The reason why we do animal research is it allows us to pose different questions in different ways than what we would do if we were using humans in our research. You have a lot more experimental control when you're using animals in your research as to when you are using humans in your research. And one of the main things that I always tell students goes along with this third part, that the procedures that might be unethical to use with humans are actually ethically okay to use with animals. Right? The only way that you would use animals in research is if you could ethically not conduct that research with humans. You know, I went to graduate school at Kansas State, and I shared a lab with the neuroscience graduate students. And one of my friends was a neuroscience major, and he was looking at fetal alcohol syndrome. It is not ethical to go out and get a bunch of pregnant women to become alcoholics so that you can then test and study their babies after they are born. That's not ethical. However, you can use animal models, and in this case, they were using mice, and they had pregnant mice who they then got addicted to alcohol, and you could then test their rat pups after they were born to look at the various behaviors they had, and you could assimilate that to how humans would behave in a typical type of situation. So there are procedures that might be ethically not possible if you were using research with humans. Now, the guidelines that are put in place by the APA is that the researchers must make every effort to minimize discomfort, illness, and pain. And they must also promote the psychological well-being of some species of research animals, such as primates. So there's a lot of concern in the animal that you're using in your research. The guidelines that are set in place when you're using mice or rats or pigeons is a lot different than if you're using dogs or cats or primates in your research. It really comes down to whether that research model, that animal, is seen as a pet. You have a lot more difficulty and a lot more guidelines to follow if you're using an animal in your research that is considered a pet, as opposed to an animal that is not considered a pet. So you must minimize discomfort, illness, and pain. It doesn't say you cannot use these, because sometimes it is necessary to use these, but you must minimize it as much as possible. The procedures that subject animals to distress are permitted. So if you must distress the animals, if there is going to be any sort of distress or pain or discomfort, it is only when an alternative procedure is unavailable. And also when the research is justified by its prospective value. Those are two procedures that are allowed to cause some distress or discomfort or pain to an animal. So you can see in this module that depending on whether you're using humans or animals in your study, it really changes how you go about conducting your study and setting it up for the guidelines that are in place. So this now ends chapter 2 on psychological research.